so trauma is too much too fast, that we can't integrate whatever has happened to us. And so the opposite to heal trauma is little bits slowly. And so helping people feel like they can slow down and then just engage with just a little bit at a time so that it's they can digest it.
Psychedelics are now acknowledged as bringing a major paradigm shift to our understanding of mental health and of human consciousness. But without some guidance, much can go awry. What are the psychological, somatic, and spiritual frameworks that can support us working with psychedelics? And who are the people stepping up to help guide us in this process? Join us as we discuss all this and more in Season 2 of Adventures of the Psyche. Hello friends, and welcome to Adventures of the Psyche Season 2, where we explore the story of psychedelics and the frameworks being used to guide us as we work with them. Today we are meeting with Ashley Booth, who is an associate clinical social worker offering ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, to discuss how the somatic and mindfulness-based psychotherapy, psychedelic integration, and IFS work to help navigate the architecture of healing. A bit more about Ashley. She gained additional experience working as a psycho-spiritual retreat facilitator at the Crossroads Treatment Center in Mexico using ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT. Is currently a co-therapist on the Los Angeles Phase 3 team for the MAP-sponsored clinical trial of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for the treatment of PTSD. And more recently, she has been trained by Compass in psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy and is a consultant for Beckley Psytech for their 5-MeO-DMT-assisted psychotherapy manual in service of upcoming research trials. She's also the co-founder of Southern California Psychedelic Society, the AWARE Project, co-founder of InnerSpace Integration, and co-founder and clinician at the California Center for Psychedelic Therapy, and is in private practice under the supervision of Darls Centola, offering IFS and psychedelic integration psychotherapy. We're just going to start with how did you get into psychedelics and how did that take you into psychedelic therapy work that you do now?
Well, I guess the short answer to that is Burning Man. I went to Burning Man my first year out of college, and it just changed the whole trajectory of my life. So I was in a very, came from a middle class family and very intellectual, and just, life was simple in a lot of ways, which was beautiful. And also when I went to Burning Man, there was so much chaos and creativity and community and all these things. It was like moving from Kansas in black and white to Oz. It was just in color. And I went into this whole world that was creativity and play, and it woke something inside of me that it was already there, but it just needed the container and the place to be able to come out and play. And so this was a space that I got to, see people using psychedelics and explore with them myself in a context that was really oriented around, well, how can we make this the most as fun as possible, to dance and to create and do silly things. And so it just really shifted my connection with myself, with other people. And so in that context, it was really a celebratory space. And I didn't really get into more of a therapeutic or healing relationship with psychedelics until years later, when I started hearing about ayahuasca ceremonies and 5-MeO-DMT, and they were held in these ceremonial, intentional containers. And so being able to engage in that way created, catalyzed something deeply inside of me that, I did the same thing that most people do, which is having this evangelical moment of being like, people need to know about this. We need to bring this back to the tribe. And so I started a psychedelic society back when I think there were maybe 5 of them around the world. And through that got connected to all the leaders in the field, got connected to MAPS. And then because I had had a previous career in research, but it was in physical oceanography and marine biology, which is a completely different space. But with that research background, I got a job as the study coordinator for the MAPS clinical trial in LA. And from there, was invited to come to the MDMA training, as an MDMA-assisted psychotherapy training, and was very engaged in that training. And my colleagues were like, you should really go back to school and get your master's and become a therapist with us. And so I did. I took a leap of faith and jumped into a completely different field. And things have continued to flow in such a beautiful way.
Tell us what you're doing now.
So I'm doing several things right now. I'm now a clinician on the MAPS clinical trial for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. I'm a co-founder here at the California Center for Psychedelic Therapy here in Los Angeles, and we provide ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for clients that are struggling with depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD. And then I've got a private practice doing preparation and integration therapy. And I'm also been trained by a couple other companies to get us ready to do research on other psychedelics. So we're poising ourselves to continue to engage in figuring out how best we can use these things.
I'm very excited about mapping out what this like mountain of healing or remembering our way to wholeness, what does that actually look like? And I know you have a handful of different modalities you're using in tandem with psychedelics. I'd love to hear, what are the top 3 that you found useful, and why do you work with them with psychedelics?
Yeah, the main ones that I'm using these days is internal family systems, Hakomi, and I guess psychedelic harm reduction. I would label it. So to clarify what those are, internal family systems is something that has influenced the MAPS clinical trial and the way that was formulated. It's not fully there, but it creates a container. And what I love about internal family systems, and the reasons why it's called that, is that Dick Schwartz, the founder of IFS, kind of recognized that we all have different aspects of ourselves, different parts of ourselves that may not agree, and we can get into kind of conflict. And so, I like to give the example of like, well, part of me wants to eat that pizza, but the other part of me is like, don't eat the pizza, it's unhealthy. Right? We naturally have conflict within us. And how we speak to ourselves, how these parts speak to each other, ourselves, can often act like a bit of an internal family. Either there could be an internal harmony or there can be a lot of conflict. And so it's called internal family systems because it's like a family inside of our heads. And so
that was like programmed by our own childhood experiences, right? So like,
yeah, and our culture, all sorts of things. Yeah, our upbringing, that our personality mixing with everything around us. But the thing, so that's sort of the foundation of it, but even a layer deeper to that, which is what is so impactful for me about this model, is that when you eventually ask all of these parts to step aside, and they can trust you to step aside, there's something deeper that emerges that's inside all of us. And in IFS, they call it the self with a capital S. And each one of our selves, our individuals, has a self that has similar qualities of compassion and curiosity and creativity and clarity and a lot of C words. And there's something that really resonated with me around that, because that's what it feels like to me when I'm doing the best therapy that I can. It's when all of my parts that have all of their perspectives and their agendas and can clear aside, I can show up with this compassionate, loving presence. And that inspires others to feel safe enough that they can step into their own compassionate, loving presence. And that helps heal our systems. And so it's just such a beautiful, elegant, but simple model. And it can be very non-pathologizing for people that have a lot of internal strife. And then they recognize that they're not, that there's actually parts that are arguing, and that they're not just kind of going crazy because they're so self-critical or whatever it is.
Could we maybe go through a potential exercise and like
Sure.
do an example? You know, I've been looking into attachment and avoidant, anxious attachment styles and avoidant attachment styles. For people who are unfamiliar, this is a relationship way of people connecting, and people who are avoidant are adverse to getting really close to people because they're afraid of being hurt, and people who are anxious might really be wanting it so much that they are often pushing away people because they're so afraid and feeling insecure. And so I've recognized I fall into some of the anxious attachment style stuff. And so when meeting somebody new, oftentimes that comes up, and then there's another part of me that doesn't want that to come up and knows that I shouldn't act in the anxious way. And so there's an internal debate. What would IFS tell me? How do you navigate those two voices that's like, yo, play cool, that's just going to push people away. And the other one that's like, I'm so worried about being abandoned again. Or feeling abandoned.
Yeah, often when we have what that's called a polarization, where one part wants thing and that it was pulling you one direction and another one's pulling you another direction. And so how we approach that is that we each give our attention to each one individually, so that we can hear why they believe what they believe, and really take time to witness that and acknowledge that. Because often when there's the polarization, neither one gets fully heard, because they're talking over each other essentially, because you're like, oh, I really want to get, no, don't do that, but I want to, and it's like nobody really gets heard. And so often you have to, for there to be a mutual disarmament so that one can feel heard, the other one might be like, well, don't listen to that one. Right. Like if we listen to that, it'll take over. And so you kind of have to do a little bit of a dance of like, okay, we're not going to let it take over. We're just here to listen, because if we can listen, we can figure out what the fear is that's underneath that, and we can help address what's happening here in a more direct way than needing to kind of be battling each other with and that there oftentimes those parts will actually find that there is a common goal, which is to like help you, have good friendships. Like that's a great goal, and they're just going about it in two different ways. And so oftentimes it can be really helpful to just realize that there's a shared goal. And then often underneath that is that there was maybe a wound around attachment, a wound around relationships that needs to be healed. And so when we can gain trust and listening from these kind of protector parts, they can soften and move back a little bit, and we can actually get to the part of you that is that was really wounded in the past, that still carries the burden of not having that connection that you needed, because it was a need that was not getting met. And so we can go in and we can connect, help you, yourself connect with that wounded part, and through that connection, you actually create secure attachment. So it's like it's attachment. It's often called attachment therapy turned inside out.
Okay, yeah. And so what does that look like when somebody's in ketamine therapy or in MDMA treatment?
People will go inside with eye shades and headphones for about 45 minutes, maybe more, depending on how long it processes through their system. But we really allow people to stay inside for that time. And then we do integration work afterwards. Other types of people use different routes of administration. So if you do an intramuscular injection, you're going to have people go into a journey. And so then they're kind of in the journey on their own for a while, and then they come out and you can do integration work. And that's when you do more of the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy piece of it. Other people use low dose ketamine either as a nasal spray or as like a lozenge, and that is what we call a psycholytic dose, which just means like loosening the psyche. And so that allows people to typically be able to continue to talk and do therapy, but they're in a slightly altered space, and then they have access to different aspects of themselves or different perspectives that they might normally not have.
So exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what about Hakomi? Tell me how that plays in.
Yeah. So before I was even got a master's in social work, I was doing Hakomi training, and Hakomi is a mindfulness-based somatic, which means just body-based psychotherapy. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're like touching the body per se, but that we are coming into awareness of our bodies and how our bodies participate in our feelings. Because when we sink into a nervous system state of like, okay, I'm not just sad, thinking of sad thoughts, but what is sadness? How does my body react to sadness? How does it participate in sadness? And following it, and it often allows us to expand into nervous system states that are similar to when we had our wounds. And so when you get into that expanded nervous system state, you can also do repair work. And so, because a lot of people will say like, well, I've told this story over and over again, but like, it's just become a story and I don't feel different. And so Hakomi is a way to like really slow the system down. And so people get into a mindful state of like what it feels like to be back in that memory. And so that nervous system state, when you can settle into it, is the place that the repair work needs to happen. It doesn't happen on a cognitive level. It needs to happen in a feeling nervous system level.
What's that look like with MDMA or with ketamine?
Yeah, that it's really supporting people in normalizing, being able to slow down and helping them, whatever's coming up around slowing down, because often people don't want to slow down because that's when all their feelings of thoughts come, right? And so supporting people into slowing down and getting curious about their nervous system. And so that has really laid a foundation for most of the work that I do. I don't know if I would say that I do specific Hakomi purely anymore, but it is, it permeates everything. Because when we slow down, trauma is too much too fast, that we can't integrate whatever has happened to us. And so the opposite to heal trauma is little bits slowly. And so helping people feel like they can slow down and then just engage with just a little bit at a time so that they can digest it.
We are struggling from so much rushing around. We've like numbed half of our experiences and we're rushing to the next thing. We're rushing to heal. And that energy of rushing is exactly what is continually re-traumatizing and not allowing these parts of being alive to like unfold, to be witnessed, to be seen, to be processed, so that we can move on to the next thing that we thought we were rushing to, right?
Well, and then what are we even rushing to? It's all about being present and like with what it's like to be alive in this moment. Right? That's the only thing that really exists right now.
That's all it is. Everything else is in your head. Yeah.
And so even if this moment is uncomfortable, this, it's all of it. This is, this is life. And obviously if you're netting more uncomfortable, experiences than comfortable experiences, then maybe you might be motivated to, shift things, but we're all just, experiencing every single little moment together. And that's it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Ash.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Thank you for asking me.